The year is 1942. The world is watching the Solomon Islands, where a tiny, steaming island called Guadalcanal has become the final bloody test of will between two naval superpowers. But the true battlefield is a deep-sea graveyard known as Iron Bottom Sound, where over 50 warships already lie tangled in the abyss. Tonight, two colossal Japanese battleships, the Hiei and the Kirishima, are steaming through the darkness. Their mission? To silence the Marines on the island and end the war. To stop these giants, the United States Navy has scraped together a mixed squadron of undersized cruisers and destroyers. Their tactical disadvantage is so extreme, their commanding admiral is already making a fatal mistake. This is not a battle. It is a terrifying, point-blank brawl that shatters every naval rule. For months, this narrow stretch of ocean has been the most contested, unforgiving battle space on the planet. A crucible where the fate of the Pacific War is being decided inch by bloody inch. The key to the entire campaign is a rudimentary dirt landing strip known to the Americans as Henderson Field. If this small patch of ground falls, the war is lost. The Japanese Imperial Navy is not simply going to surrender the initiative. They are committing their most lethal weapons to the final, decisive gamble. Their strategy is elegant in its brutality. Nightly, high-speed resupply runs known to the Americans as the Tokyo Express. If the American forces can hold the slot, the New Georgia Sound, they starve the Japanese troops on the island. If the Japanese can punch through with a heavy reinforcement convoy, carrying 11,000 fresh, fully equipped troops, they will tip the scales and throw the American forces back into the sea. In November, the stakes reached a fever pitch. Intelligence confirmed the immense, coordinated Japanese effort. To clear the way for their decisive troop landing, the Japanese were sending in their titans, the colossal battleships Hiei and Kirishima. These behemoths, armed with 14-inch main guns, were meant to bombard Henderson Field into silence. The United States Navy knew they had to stop this fleet, or the Marines on Guadalcanal would be lost. This was a battle they could not refuse, yet one they were almost certain to lose. And the man charged with stopping them had already deployed his fleet in a way that guaranteed total catastrophe. The American counterforce was a hastily assembled, mixed squadron of cruisers and destroyers, ships built for scouting, now ordered to stand in the face of naval battleships designed to destroy everything smaller than themselves. The odds were long, but the necessity was absolute. The American fleet, under the command of Rear Admiral Daniel J. Callahan, steamed toward the slot with a knot of dread in their collective stomachs. The tactical challenges were nightmarish. The fighting was to take place at night, in cramped, shallow waters. Navigation was treacherous. Radar was primitive, and the Japanese preference for deadly, long-range torpedo attacks meant that a single mistake could wipe out a ship entirely. This was not the classical, measured naval warfare of the Atlantic. This was to be a blinding, close-quarters slugfest, where technology, darkness, and human error would combine to create a chaos unseen in modern naval history. The sun was setting now, painting the sky with a desperate orange glow before surrendering the stage to the black, menacing night. Callahan's ships slipped past Cape Esperance, the gateway to the terrifying embrace of Iron Bottom Sound. They knew what was coming for them: steel, fire, and the massive guns of the Imperial Japanese Navy. There would be no retreat. The stage was set for a confrontation that would define the entire campaign. The immense disciplined power of the Japanese fleet, led by two titans of the sea, was on a collision course with a small, exhausted American task force. The two navies, locked in a brutal race for control of the sea and air, were about to fight the naval equivalent of a bar brawl, close, disorienting, and unforgiving. The fate of thousands of Marines and the course of the Pacific War rested on the courage of the men now sailing into the darkness. The tactical plan Admiral Callahan had been forced to adopt aboard the light cruiser USS San Francisco was born not of strength, but of desperation. His task force was an ill-sorted collection against Vice Admiral Hiroaki Abe's bombardment force, centered around the two monstrous Japanese battleships. The disparity was not just in numbers, but in firepower. The Japanese 14-inch guns could rip any of Callahan's ships apart in a single salvo. Callahan's great gamble, as he closed on the enemy, was to attempt a flanking move and exploit the American, though unreliable, radar advantage. However, as the ships moved into position, a devastating series of errors and communication failures began to unravel the American plan. The most critical mistake was the deployment itself. Callahan, unfamiliar with the nuances of his task force, chose to lead the ships in a single, tight column. He placed his 5 cruisers in the middle, sandwiched between his destroyers. This formation, adopted in the hope of maximizing firepower along the column, created a nightmare of friendly fire potential in a melee. Furthermore, the cruiser selected to lead, the Atlanta, did not have the most advanced radar equipment. Worse still, Admiral Callahan was aboard the heavy cruiser San Francisco, which was positioned 4th in the column, not leading it. This location prevented him from having a clear, immediate view of the engagement or the most effective radar feed. The stage was being set for confusion, the kind of confusion that would invite immediate, close-range disaster. As the two forces closed in the darkness of the early morning hours of November the 13th, the American ships began picking up contact on their radar screens. The air crackled with tense, sometimes misunderstood, transmissions. The destroyer, USS Helena, equipped with the best radar in the task force, was the first to detect the Japanese and attempted to relay the critical information. But because of the confusion on the San Francisco's bridge and Callahan's reluctance to fire until he could visually confirm the targets, precious minutes were lost. In the chaos of misaligned communications, the American column sailed directly across the path of the Japanese destroyers. In an instant, the meticulously arranged battle line turned into a swirling, lethal traffic jam. The Japanese, who preferred the element of surprise and the close-range punch of their torpedoes, saw their opportunity. Helena's commander, Captain Hoover, desperate to break the paralysis of command, was heard to ask over the circuit, "Guns, what are you waiting for? Shoot!" Suddenly, the lights came on. A Japanese destroyer, sighting the American column at an impossible range of 3,000 yards, flicked on its massive searchlights. The blinding white beams locked onto the light cruiser USS Atlanta, freezing her in the crosshairs. The illusion of organization was shattered. The distance between the fleets was so close, it defied every naval doctrine established since the dawn of gunpowder. In this instant, the American command dissolved entirely. Callaghan, realizing the catastrophe, issued a confusing order. Odd ships fire to starboard, even ships fire to port. In the confusion, this order was barely heard, let alone understood, by the ships trapped in the ensuing maelstrom. It was now a fight for survival, ship to ship, at ranges no fleet commander would ever willingly attempt. The most dangerous surface action of the Pacific War was officially underway. The tension had broken, replaced by the terrifying sound of 12-inch steel ripping through the night. They were about to collide in the dark, and one Japanese sailor was about to pull a switch that would plunge the entire world into fire. The chaos that followed was total. The engagement had begun so close that the Japanese battleship Hiei, the behemoth meant to bombard the airfield, was caught directly in the line of the American cruisers and destroyers. It was an accident of staggering proportion. The American ships fired indiscriminately at the towering silhouettes, and the Japanese retaliated with every gun and torpedo tube they possessed. In the space of less than 10 minutes, the battle was less a coordinated naval action and more a high-speed car crash. The ships were often less than 500 yards apart. The noise was deafening, the smoke was blinding, and the air was thick with the scream of shells and the smell of death. This was a battle won not by superior tactics, but by the sheer, unadulterated will of the sailors. If you want to witness more astonishing moments of history, where courage faced impossible odds, please subscribe to the channel and join our community. The confusion was not limited to the American side. Admiral Abe aboard the Hiei was also caught completely off guard, having expected a long-range battle with American battleships, not a point-blank knife fight with destroyers. His primary targets, the shore installations, were miles away, yet he was now locked in a close-range duel he had not prepared for. The searchlight beams from the Japanese ships cut through the smoke and darkness, instantly illuminating targets, but also making the Japanese ships massive, unmissable targets themselves. The first major casualty was the USS Atlanta. Illuminated by the enemy searchlights, she was instantly hit by a torrent of Japanese shells and torpedoes. A torpedo ripped through her engine room, and the battleship Hiei began pouring shells into her superstructure. But in the nightmare of the melee, the Atlanta was also struck by friendly fire. At least one shell from the USS San Francisco slammed into her bridge, killing most of the senior officers, including Admiral Scott, the previous commander of the American force who was observing the battle. The ship was instantly crippled, a floating wreck of tangled steel and smoke, its life extinguished in a matter of minutes. The San Francisco, Callahan's flagship, suffered a similar nightmarish fate. She was suddenly caught in the crossfire between Japanese and American ships. In the darkness, she closed the distance on the towering Hiei. The two ships engaged in a horrific gun duel, with the battleship's colossal 14-inch guns beginning to batter the cruiser's superstructure. One salvo was particularly devastating, slamming directly into San Francisco's bridge. Admiral Callahan, his entire staff, and the ship's captain, Cassin Young, were either killed or mortally wounded. Command was instantly obliterated. The captain's last, desperate order was simply, fight the ship. The cruiser, rudderless and nearly leaderless, was soon struck again by friendly shells fired from the USS Helena, completing the circle of tragic, chaotic damage. The sheer volume of explosions turned the sound into a hellscape. Destroyers spun in circles, attempting to launch torpedoes and avoid collisions. The Japanese, masterfully handling their deadly long-lance torpedoes, began to rack up devastating hits. The destroyer USS Cushing was hit repeatedly and began to burn, its crew fighting fires and incoming shells until the ship was an inferno. The destroyer La Fay attempted to interpose itself between the battleship Hiei and the crippled San Francisco. The La Fay was so close, mere yards from the colossal battleship, that its 5-inch guns could not depress low enough to fire on the hull. Instead, the destroyer crew poured 20mm machine gun fire into the battleship's bridge, reportedly injuring Admiral Abe and sending his staff scrambling for cover. It was an audacious, suicidal maneuver, but it saved the San Francisco from an immediate second salvo. The Hiei, now blinded and confused, began to lumber through the narrow space. Despite its massive armor, it was absorbing relentless punishment from the small American cruisers and destroyers. The sheer proximity of the American ships was saving them. The Japanese battleship was simply not designed to fight at these ranges. Its huge guns could not effectively track the fast-moving, smaller targets. The battle was a savage, close-range nightmare that defied any notion of conventional warfare. The darkness, the smoke, and the immediate deadly proximity had turned the engagement into a desperate free-for-all, where only pure instinct and raw courage dictated survival. The Americans had lost their command structure, their formation, and several ships, but they had managed to stall the battleship's momentum. The Japanese Titan was now wounded and adrift in the chaos of Iron Bottom Sound. The massive, terrifying bulk of the Japanese battleship Hiei, though still afloat, was now a critical casualty. It had been hit by a staggering 50 or more shells from the American cruisers and destroyers, its superstructure shredded, and its steering gear completely disabled. Admiral Abe, wounded and stunned by the viciousness of the point-blank brawl, realized the night's original mission, the bombardment of Henderson Field, was now impossible. He ordered the battle group to withdraw, leaving a wake of burning, sinking American ships behind them, but also leaving the crippled Hiei to struggle in the murky waters. As the Japanese main force retreated, the last remaining American destroyers committed to a series of incredible, sacrificial maneuvers. These destroyers, the smallest ships in the fleet, were now the only defense against the crippled Japanese battleship and the rest of the returning Japanese fleet. The USS Lafay, having performed its miraculous, desperate run against the Hiei's bridge, soon became the target of the full Japanese fury. It was engulfed by 9 massive shells and a torpedo. The ship was ripped apart by the explosions and sank almost immediately, a testament to the crew's bravery and sacrifice. The destroyer USS Barton suffered a similar, almost instant doom. It was caught unaware by a Japanese torpedo attack and exploded, sinking in less than 3 minutes, its stern blown 1,000 completely off. It was a rapid, horrifying sequence of events that underlined the sheer lethal power of the Japanese long-lance torpedoes. The waters were now filled with the bodies of American sailors, debris, and the ghostly silhouettes of burning ships. The American destroyer USS Monson was next, blasted by Japanese shells until it was a floating pyre, sinking after its crew abandoned the blazing wreckage. The final 2 destroyers, the USS Fletcher and the O'Bannon, worked heroically in the darkness to pick up survivors and, incredibly, continue the fight. They maneuvered through the wreckage, dodging friendly and enemy fire, targeting the few remaining Japanese ships still on the scene. Their commitment to the fight, even after the command structure had collapsed and 4 destroyers had been lost, was a defining characteristic of the battle. They embodied the desperate, individual courage required to survive the night. Meanwhile, the Hiei was in dire straits. The American damage was severe, but it was the lack of control that spelled its doom. The massive battleship was wallowing, its rudder jammed, its steering mechanism destroyed. Admiral Abe spent the last few hours before dawn attempting to tow the massive ship out of the slot, but the effort was in vain. The Hiei remained a colossal, wounded animal, unable to move at a fighting speed, slowly drifting toward the American-controlled waters. This failure to quickly sink or tow the battleship was the critical Japanese error of the night, a direct consequence of the shocking damage inflicted by the small American ships. As the faint grey light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, the American Air Force was already warming up at Henderson Field. For the wounded Japanese battleship, the night of close quarters combat had ended, but the final, inescapable reckoning was about to begin. The small American ships had succeeded in their impossible mission, though they were yet to realize the scale of their sacrifice. If you're enjoying this dive into history's most insane naval battles, please comment below and let me know which battle you'd like us to cover next. The dawn of November the 13th revealed a scene of utter devastation. The grey light illuminated Iron Bottom Sound, now choked with oil slicks, debris, and the still burning hulks of 5 American ships. The losses were horrific. 2 admirals, Daniel Callahan and Norman Scott, were dead, along with over 1,300 American sailors. The American tactical defeat, measured in ships sunk and men lost, was undeniable and catastrophic. However, floating prominently on the horizon was the crippled, wounded giant, the Japanese battleship Hiei. The ship, now confirmed to be the first Japanese battleship lost in the entire war, was still stubbornly afloat but unable to maneuver. The American air assets, launched from the airfield the Marines had held so desperately, converged on the crippled giant. Torpedo planes and dive bombers launched wave after wave of attacks. The massive Hiei, unable to return fire effectively or steer out of the way, endured hours of punishment. Finally, the decision was made by the Japanese command to scuttle the ship, sinking the massive Titan into the depths of Iron Bottom Sound. The combined action of the American surface fleet, despite the heavy losses, had achieved the one objective that mattered most. The Japanese massive troop convoy, carrying 11,000 fresh soldiers, was shattered, scattered, and forced to retreat without landing its men. This was the ultimate strategic victory born from tactical defeat. Admiral Callahan and the sailors had sacrificed their ships and their lives, but in doing so, they had decisively denied the Japanese the ability to reinforce their position on Guadalcanal. With the supply lines permanently cut and the American air dominance secured, the desperate, close-quarters slugfest of November was the moment the tide of the Pacific War finally turned. The legacy of the naval battle of Guadalcanal is not measured in tactical excellence, but in raw courage under the most impossible conditions. It was a battle where the rules were thrown out, where ships fought like men with knives, and where the sacrifice of small, outgunned vessels saved an entire campaign. The point-blank range, the darkness, and the sheer audacity of the American destroyer crews became legendary. The men who perished in the waters of Iron Bottom Sound ensured that the island of Guadalcanal would remain a lifeline for the Allied forces. Their courage proved that even the deadliest of war machines can be defeated by sheer, unadulterated human defiance. If you want to support more high-stakes historical stories like this, please share this video with someone who loves military history. This is the story of how a seemingly impossible tactical defeat resulted in the pivotal strategic victory of the Guadalcanal campaign. It proves that in the deepest darkness, the courage of a few can change the course of history, and that even the largest battleships are not immune to the fury of a desperate, point-blank brawl. If you were gripped by this story, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into the battles that shaped our world. Let me know in the comments what piece of military history you think deserves the cinematic treatment next.